Number 8. Persephone. Picture this for a second. You're a teenage girl, out picking flowers in a field, and the ground just opens. Not every betrayal on this list needed a sword or a war. This one started with a father saying, "Sure, take her," and never bothering to mention it to anyone who might have objected. Persephone was gathering flowers in a sunlit meadow when the earth split open without warning, and Hades, god of the dead, rose up in his chariot and dragged her down into the underworld before she could even scream loud enough for anyone to hear. Here's the part that gets left out of the pretty version of this story. Zeus already knew. Hades had asked his own brother for permission to take Persephone as his wife, and Zeus said yes, knowing exactly what that meant for her, and never said a word to her mother, Demeter. Not a warning, not a heads up, nothing. So Demeter did what any parent would do when their child simply vanishes. She searched the entire earth, and while she searched, she stopped every crop on the planet from growing, because grief has a way of making the whole world stop with you. The land started to starve, right along with her. And when she finally learned the truth, that her own brother-in-law had taken her daughter with her own husband's silent blessing, she wasn't angry at some faceless monster. She was angry at family, at the two men closest to her. Zeus only stepped in once mortals actually started dying of famine, and let's be honest, that's not remorse, that's damage control, his big solution. Persephone would split her year between two worlds, forced into a compromise that nobody asked her opinion on. And here's the thing that should bother you more than it probably does. Even the supposed happy ending isn't really a happy ending. It's just a smaller betrayal wearing a nicer outfit. Persephone never got her old life back. She got a custody arrangement built entirely around what was convenient for the men who'd already decided her fate without her. There's a detail most retellings quietly skip. While she was down there, Hades gave her pomegranate seeds, and in the old rules of that world, eating anything grown in the underworld bound you to return to it. Some versions say he tricked her into eating them. Others hint she ate them herself, on purpose, the one sliver of agency she managed to claim in a story where absolutely everyone else had already decided things for her. And this wasn't just a bedtime story for the ancient Greeks. An entire secretive religious tradition, the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most closely guarded rites in the ancient world, grew directly out of this myth, built around a mother's grief and a daughter who never got asked a single question about her own life. Number 7. Prometheus. Here's a question worth sitting with. What happens to you when you do the right thing for the wrong side? Prometheus never lifted a weapon against the gods. His crime was helping someone the gods had already decided didn't deserve help. In the earliest days of the world, humanity was cold, starving, and completely helpless. No fire, no real tools, stuck in a world the gods had built strictly for themselves. Prometheus, a titan who had actually fought alongside Zeus during the war that put him on the throne, looked at struggling humanity and made a choice that would define the rest of his existence. He stole fire from Olympus and handed it to mortals, along with something even more dangerous in the gods' eyes: real knowledge, medicine, writing, mathematics, the tools that finally let a fragile species start building something that might last. Zeus didn't see generosity in that. He saw a rule broken, a hierarchy questioned, and worse than either of those, a titan who'd once stood at his side, now choosing humans over him. So the punishment wasn't fast, and it definitely wasn't merciful. Zeus had him dragged to a remote mountain peak and chained to bare rock with bonds no god or mortal could break, arms spread wide, completely exposed to the sky. And then, every single day, an eagle sent specifically by Zeus arrived and tore open his side to eat his liver. Because Prometheus was immortal, it grew back by the next morning. every time, which meant the horror simply reset itself over and over for centuries with 0 days off. He wasn't tortured for attacking a god. He was tortured for caring about mortals more than Zeus ever thought a Titan was allowed to. Prometheus's own name literally translates to forethought. He was said to be able to see the future, which means, in the darkest possible reading of this myth, he chose to help humanity while already knowing exactly what it was going to cost him. In some tellings of the myth, that punishment feels even crueler once you know the rest of Prometheus's story. He wasn't just humanity's benefactor, he was their creator, shaping the very first humans out of river clay, long before he ever handed them a single spark of fire. Zeus wasn't just punishing generosity, he was punishing a father, in every sense but blood, for protecting something he'd made with his own hands, and the chains didn't come off for centuries, not until the demigod Heracles happened to pass that same mountain during one of his own labors, shot the eagle out of the sky, and finally broke the shackles himself, one small act of mercy in a myth that otherwise runs entirely on cruelty. Number 6. Actaeon. This is the one that still makes hunters uneasy centuries later, and once you hear it, you'll understand why. Actaeon was skilled, respected, the kind of hunter other hunters studied. He wasn't looking for trouble that day. While tracking game through the forest with his hounds, he stumbled, by pure accident, onto a hidden grove where the goddess Artemis happened to be bathing with her nymphs. He hadn't followed her. He hadn't lingered. He barely had time to process what he was looking at before she noticed him standing there. And it didn't matter to Artemis that it was an accident. It never does, on this list. Furious that a mortal man had seen her exposed, she didn't offer him a chance to explain, or apologize, or even look away. She simply flung water from the spring straight at his face. The moment it touched him, antlers erupted from his skull, his skin thickened into hide, and within seconds Actaeon had been transformed completely into a stag, unable to speak, unable to tell a single soul what had just happened to him. And here's where it gets genuinely awful. His own hunting dogs, animals he had raised and trained himself, dogs that had hunted loyally at his side for years, caught his scent moments later. They didn't recognize him. They just saw a deer. Actaeon tried to run, tried to signal to the men nearby who he actually was. No human sound came out of him anymore, just the panicked noise of prey. His own hounds brought him down and tore him apart exactly the way he'd trained them to do to any other stag, while the rest of his hunting party cheered the kill from a distance, completely unaware they were celebrating the death of their own friend. Some versions of the myth go even further and claim Actaeon didn't just stumble onto the grove by accident. That afterward, before Artemis could act, he boasted to anyone who'd listen that he'd seen the goddess bathing, turning an accident into something closer to an insult in her eyes. Whether he ever said a word about it or stayed completely silent barely changed the outcome. The poet Ovid was so fixated on this story that he individually named over 30 separate hounds involved in the kill, turning what should have been a quick footnote into one of the most detailed death scenes anywhere in Greek mythology, proof of just how unsettling ancient audiences found the idea of loyalty turned into a weapon without any warning at all. Number 5. Niobe. Ask yourself honestly, how many of us have said something arrogant at a party we immediately regretted? Now imagine the gods were listening, and imagine what regret actually cost. Niobe had everything a queen could want: wealth, status, a devoted husband, and 14 children, 7 sons, 7 daughters, more than almost any other mother in Greek myth. That alone should have been the whole story. Instead, at a public festival honoring the goddess Leto, who had only 2 children of her own, Apollo and Artemis, Niobe made one comment too many, bragging loudly that she deserved more worship than Leto because she'd produced 7 times as many kids. Leto heard about it, and Leto didn't forgive it, and she didn't handle it personally either. She sent her own children to answer the insult for her. Apollo and Artemis, gods of the bow, descended together and methodically hunted down every single one of Niobe's 14 children, Apollo taking the 7 sons while they trained or played, Artemis taking the 7 daughters in turn. An entire generation of a royal family erased in a single day because their mother bragged too loudly at the wrong event. Niobe begged. She watched child after child fall, unable to stop any of it. And by the time the last arrow landed, there was nothing left in her to keep functioning as a living woman. The myth says her grief was so total, so complete, that she simply turned to stone where she stood. And even as solid rock, her face never stopped weeping. Water still runs down that mountainside today, and the story insists those are her tears, centuries after 14 deaths caused them. There's a detail here that quietly connects this story to another name. Later on this very list, Niobe's own father was Tantalus, the same king whose punishment closes out this countdown, which means arrogance in front of the gods wasn't just a personal flaw of hers, it ran directly through the family. The mountain associated with her transformation, Mount Sipylus in modern-day Turkey, still has a rock formation people claim resembles a weeping woman's face, and locals were pointing tourists toward it as Niobe's tears more than 2,000 years before tourism was even a word. Number 4. Arachne. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can be isn't wrong. It's correct, in front of someone who can't stand being shown up. Arachne was, by any honest measure, the greatest weaver in the mortal world, and she absolutely knew it. Her tapestries were so lifelike, people traveled long distances just to watch her hands move. Eventually, she made the mistake so many mortals on this list made. She said, out loud, that her skill rivaled the goddess Athena's, the actual patron goddess of weaving. Athena, disguised as an old woman, gave her one chance, warning her directly to take it back and beg forgiveness before things escalated. Arachne refused. She was confident enough in her own talent to challenge the goddess outright to a weaving contest, once and for all. Athena accepted. Athena's tapestry showed the gods in glory, powerful, dignified, exactly how gods like to be remembered. Arachne's tapestry showed something far more dangerous. The gods' own affairs, deceptions, and abuses of mortal women, rendered with technical perfection. And that was the actual crime, not the arrogance, the accuracy. Athena examined the work, found no flaw she could legitimately punish, and tore it apart with her own hands out of pure rage instead. Arachne, humiliated and shattered, tried to hang herself. Athena wouldn't even grant her a clean death. She loosened the rope just enough to keep her alive, then transformed her permanently into a spider, condemned to weave for the rest of eternity, forever small, forever spinning threads nobody would ever again travel to admire. Her name is the entire reason every spider on the planet is still scientifically classified as an arachnid today. A permanent linguistic scar left behind by a goddess who couldn't stand being outdone, still quietly repeated every time a biology textbook gets opened 3,000 years later. Number 3, Marsyas. This is the one that's genuinely hard to read, so consider that your warning. Marsyas was a satyr who picked up a flute discarded on the ground, an instrument Athena herself had thrown away after realizing it puffed out her cheeks in a way she found unflattering. Marsyas turned out to be extraordinarily talented on it, good enough that people started whispering his music rivaled Apollo's own lyre playing. Word reached Apollo, and rather than shrug off the comparison, the god of music challenged Marsyas directly to a contest, judged by the muses, with one condition set from the start: The winner could do absolutely anything he wanted to the loser. Marsyas, confident in his gift, agreed to those terms. The contest was close, genuinely close, until Apollo changed the rules mid-competition, adding a final round where each of them had to play their instrument upside down while singing at the same time. A lyre can do that. A flute physically cannot. Apollo won on a technicality he invented on the spot, and he claimed his prize immediately, without a second's hesitation, in front of the same muses who had just watched him bend the rules to get there. He had Marsyas strung upside down from a tree and skinned him alive, peeling every layer from his body while he was still conscious enough to feel every second of it. The myth says the surrounding nymphs and satyrs cried so hard for so long that their tears formed an entire river. Later named after Marsyas himself, the only lasting monument to a musician who wasn't punished for losing badly. He was punished for being good enough to make a god feel threatened. The contest reportedly took place in Phrygia, and the river said to have formed from the mourners' endless tears still appears on ancient maps under Marsyas's own name, one of the only geographic features anywhere in Greek mythology named after the loser of a story instead of the god who won it. Number 2. Tantalus. Trust is a strange currency with the gods. Tantalus had more of it than almost any mortal alive, a king who regularly dined at Olympus itself, treated as something close to an equal, which makes what he did next almost impossible to fully explain. Wanting to test whether the gods were truly all-knowing, or maybe just chasing the darkest possible way to prove his own cleverness, Tantalus killed his own son, Pelops, cut him into pieces, cooked him, and served the meal to the gods at a banquet, waiting to see if anyone would notice what they were actually eating. Every single god at that table recognized the horror instantly and refused to touch it. Every god except Demeter, still lost in grief over her missing daughter Persephone, who absent-mindedly ate a piece of the boy's shoulder before anyone could stop her. The gods were furious beyond anything Tantalus had planned for. They restored Pelops to life, replaced his missing shoulder with one carved from ivory, and turned their entire fury on the father who had done this to his own child. The punishment was built to match the crime with almost poetic precision. Standing forever in a pool of water up to his chin, fruit-laden branches hanging just above his head, Tantalus was cursed with a hunger and thirst that could never, ever be satisfied. Every time he bent down to drink, the water pulled away before it touched his lips. Every time he reached up for the fruit, the branches lifted just out of reach. He had once tested whether the gods would consume something monstrous. He spent eternity being denied the most basic nourishment a living thing needs to survive. His name is the entire reason the word tantalizing exists in the English language today, a permanent linguistic scar left behind by a punishment engineered specifically to turn hunger and thirst themselves into instruments of eternal cruelty. And he wasn't even punished alone down there. His neighbor in that particular corner of the underworld was Sisyphus, endlessly pushing his boulder up the same hill for eternity, the two of them turning one small section of the afterlife into something close to an open-air museum of divine overkill. Number 1, Bellerophon. Save this one for last, because it might be the betrayal that stings worst of all. Not because the gods punished him out of nowhere, but because for most of his life, they were the ones building him up. Exiled from his home city over an accidental killing, Bellerophon was given, personally, by Athena, a golden bridle capable of taming Pegasus, the divine winged horse no mortal had ever managed to ride. With that gift alone, he went on to kill the Chimera, a fire-breathing monster no army could touch, and wipe out entire raiding tribes single-handedly, transforming from an exiled nobody into one of the most celebrated heroes alive, all because the gods had personally handed him the tools to become one. And that's exactly what makes the ending land like a betrayal instead of simple bad luck. Bellerophon, drunk on a lifetime of divine favor, decided the gods who'd elevated him so completely must have meant for him to join them permanently, and rode Pegasus straight toward Mount Olympus itself. Zeus didn't send a warning first. He sent a single gadfly to sting Pegasus mid-flight, and when the horse reared in agony far above the clouds, Bellerophon fell. He wasn't killed outright, which might almost have been the mercy here. He survived, crippled, blinded in most versions of the myth, and spent the rest of his life wandering the earth completely alone, shunned by the very gods who had spent years turning him into a legend, discarded the second his gratitude stopped being interesting to them. The gods hadn't punished a villain here. They'd simply thrown away a hero the moment he stopped being useful to their story. Pegasus, freed of its rider, flew on without him and was eventually given a permanent place in the night sky, immortalized as its own constellation, visible proof, if you ever needed it, of exactly how replaceable Bellerophon had become the instant he stopped being interesting to the gods who made him. 8 betrayals, and not one of them came from a monster. They came from the people mortals were raised to trust the most. Parents deciding their children's entire fates without asking, gods punishing honesty while rewarding flattery, favor handed out generously and then ripped away the instant it stopped being convenient. That's the part the word myth quietly hides from you. These were never really cautionary tales about monsters lurking in the dark. They were cautionary tales about the people already standing closest to you,